Hey, it's Rick, aka Concrete River. Wanted to go ahead and try to clear the decks on some Flavorwest today. I know I've been doing a lot of that company lately, but honestly, I've got the samples. We'll go ahead and blow through them, do some more first tests. I'm glad that people like the coconut video, and in the future, moving on, I'm going to be trying to produce a little bit more content like that. I feel like sometimes it can get a little bit redundant, so I'm going to keep it pretty tightly focused, but we'll see what happens with it. But that's far in the future. Today we have a whole bunch of vaguely junky Flavorwest flavors to test and then some tangerine. um, so today I have their Green Goblin flavor, which used to be called Monster or Monster Type or whatever the hell Flavorwest does with all of its flavors. So anyway, Monster Energy drink, Flavorwest. Fantastic. I also have their Beetle Juice, and I have their Jawbreaker, and then we're going to finish it up with Tangerine. All this stuff's been steeped for, I think, 5 days. Now, just dragging a little bit behind, but that's okay. We're going to catch up today. So, starting out with the Green Goblin, I don't have a ton of experience with this flavor, but I did recently try a recipe that had it up at 8%, and I liked it up there. So I kicked my testing percentage up to 8% for this. This is apparently a weaker flavor. When they say Green Goblin, what they're supposed to mean, I guess, is green Monster Energy flavor. The recipe that I tried was actually Fallon off the DIY or Die Discord, and I think the recipe is probably up on ATF. I'll go ahead and link it if it's up there. But it was a blueberry monster. The monster note was fantastic, and at least in terms of accuracy, as fantastic as green monster can ever taste. But I was impressed with it so far, so I had it sitting around. We'll give it a shot. 8% Green Goblin. So, trying it solo as opposed to mix. Yeah, that's basically Green Monster, for better or worse. So just right off the bat, I'll give it a whole lot of props for accuracy. Not so much that it tastes like an actual beverage. It's kind of a warm, dry flavor a little bit, but the actual taste, that like taste profile, whatever the fuck Green Monster is actually supposed to be, this is doing it really well. It feels like there's some kind of citrus in there. Sort of like an abstract tart citrus. It doesn't really like tie back to anything in particular, but it has that monster kind of tartness to it. The other thing that it does really well is produces the same kind of off flavor that Monster does. So Green Monster, right? When you take a drink of that, it's kind of an aggressively bad flavor. And I say that as somebody who enjoys it and has drank more than their share of it in the past, but it has that sort of artificial plastic note that I kind of associate with like Play-Doh flavors. There's a surprising lack of in-depth tasting notes on energy drinks. So there's a market segment I'll get into next. But just reading up on it and reading up on those kind of flavors, I think part of where I recognize those flavors from are like beer and stuff like that. And in beer, they're called phenolic flavors, and there's some sort of vinyl phenol or something that ends up being generated from the weird way that like chlorine interacts with something or other. But it's that kind of like Play-Doh plastic note that isn't objectively pleasant, but also is just right up front in Monster. To me, that's one of the biggest differences between like Monster or Red Bull. Monster's a little bit sweeter, and it has that weird kind of like artificial plasticky taste to it. And this definitely does that really well. It's actually kind of spooky, spot on with how off that flavor is. And sweetness level is good on it. It's about as sweet as you're going to want something that's modeled on Green Monster. The flavor is kind of built in an interesting way. It has like a heavy down low sweetness, and then it has that like kind of weird bitter, citrusy plastic top note. It feels like it has like a big hole in the middle of the flavor. That's actually probably a good thing. It seems like it's going to be really easy to go ahead and just plug like a nice bright fruit flavor in here. And it will kind of nestle in there without really stepping over what actually makes this taste like Monster. Doesn't feel like effervescent or fizzy at all, in so much as we can even get that flavor. But it does feel a little bit heavy, a little syrupy, a little dry. I think this would work really well with just a little bit of cooling to kind of lighten up and freshen up the mouthfeel and kind of drag it closer to the sort of beverage vape. But in terms of using this, I don't necessarily think you really have to overcomplicate it. I mean, it tastes like green Monster, so go ahead and add just a bright, stupid fruit flavor in the middle, something vaguely artificial, add a little bit of cooling, and I guess some sweetener if you want to go absolutely over the top and you want randos to like it. But it's a really solid representation of a flavor that isn't all that great, but it has some very specific associations. It does that really well. This is Concrete River's choice. So next we have Beetle Juice. The Beetle Juice made internet famous by Captain Cannibal's quest to clone Sherb by Jimmy the Juice Man. If you haven't caught up on that, it's an entire fascinating saga involving like a mass spec and some sort of deeply placed mole that knew that the key to the juice was using beetle juice. So I'm tried to buy the beetle juice after that actually dropped, and it was sold out for a while. So I'm not sure what the beetle juice sales are like right now, but it absolutely makes that clone recipe work, and it brings like you can quibble with balancing all day long, and I'd argue that the clone is actually a little bit more aggressive and fruity, which I like, but it definitely has that same kind of vibe. But I've never tested it solo. So this is Beetle Juice at 6%, steeped for 5 days. So right off the bat, I think I'm getting something that tastes a lot like that big stick flavor that Flavorwest just put out, the one that had pineapple and cherry. I'm definitely tasting some kind of fake cherry in there. It has some of those like medicinal fake cherry off notes to it. And there's a fruity sweetness in here. It's really hard to actually put your finger on what's going on. I could see it being used for like sort of an artificial sherbet flavor. It definitely has that sort of mixed fruit vibe. You've got like cherry and then something sweeter and a little bit more neutral, like a candy pineapple. And then there's just some kind of weirdness right in the middle of there. The one thing about this flavor is pretty top heavy. Actually, it's surprisingly top heavy. It's actually doing a lot of what the Green Goblin does, which it has that sort of like heavy, sweet, vaguely artificial base, and then it has a whole bunch going on in the top notes. And this definitely feels like another flavor where there's that big hole right in the middle that you can plug something else in. So for that Sherb clone, I believe it was mandarin, FA's mandarin, FA raspberry, and I think there was a lime in there too. And that seems like a really smart approach to kind of dealing with this flavor. I would use it primarily for those top notes, those kind of like artificial, like not quite candied fruit, but definitely like an artificial fruit flavoring top note. But it has that nice big yawning chasm right there in the middle of it that you can just kind of plug other flavors in. And I think if you stick to fruits, I'm not sure there's really a fruit that wouldn't fit in there. I'd probably stay away from anything too top heavy and floral, just because this already has a whole lot going on the top notes. But if you end up using something that's just a little bit straight down the middle and heavy and syrupy, I think it's going to go ahead and sort of pull the entire flavor together. Does it taste like Beetles? None of the Beetles that I've ate, but that's fine. Maybe I'm just eating the wrong Beetles. Does taste a little bit like Michael Keaton in 1991. Definitely has some of that going on, so I could see the Beetlejuice thing. Yeah, and the base doesn't feel necessarily overly sweet. It's a little bit less aggressive than the base on the Green Goblin, but it has that same kind of like artificial taste. Like it tastes like flavoring chemicals, which sounds like a bad thing. And then you start to realize that like a lot of the profiles that people want actually have that pronounced artificiality to it. It's a little thin overall, a little thin, a little top heavy. Definitely needs something to get going. It isn't like a stand-in, like this is your fruit mix. It feels like it needs some support and some bolstering, but it does do those top notes really well. It brings that kind of fruity edge in the top notes. So next we have Jawbreaker, and I was under the impression that this had sugar syrup in it for the longest time. I just checked the SDS on Flavorwest. They're generally okay at putting in sugar syrup or fructose or any of that other stuff that actually shows up in the flavor. It will generally be in the SDS. This doesn't have it in the SDS, which is a good sign. You're going to think I'm crazy because I'm testing these back to back, but it definitely feels like it's a piece with those other two flavors, with the Green Goblin and with the Beetle Juice, and in the way that the actual flavor seems like it's built. You have kind of like a chalky but fairly thick like candy base going on there, and it's not really, the base itself doesn't really even taste particularly flavored. It tastes like just straight up sugar candy, like the base on a Jawbreaker. It also has quite a bit going on in the top notes, and the top notes are almost like a pink bubblegum flavor to it. If the many other bubblegums aren't actually working for you, this would be a pretty good stand-in to kind of like thicken up another fruit and take it more in a pink bubblegum direction. In those top notes, I'm definitely getting some citrus. This one feels like it has either some lemon or some orange in there. And again, this may just be me freaking out, but I think I taste artificial cherry in this one too. It's heavily sweet, definitely a candy flavor. It actually does a pretty good job of evoking a Jawbreaker overall, and it's kind of the running theme with some of the Flavorwest flavors. The good ones is they do artificial flavors fairly well, and I'm not necessarily sure that I want this flavor in my life, but for what it is, it's actually pretty well done. It feels like in terms of pairing it, a lot of what you'd end up having to do would be like if you had a flavor that didn't have great texture, like Flavorwest Star Candy or Flavor Arts Blender Eyes. You kind of wanted to bring some of that candy texture back into something, and that candy sort of artificial fruitiness and sweetness and like light chalkiness. I think this would actually go really well to kind of fill out candy flavors that don't necessarily have the body to pull off what they're trying to do by themselves. I'm testing this up at 6%, which is kind of my high standard test for Flavorwest, and there's not a whole lot to... It's not really a pleasant flavor, but I get the feeling like it's going to blend really well. But yeah, it seems to have that thing where it has a lot going on the bottom end, a lot going on the top end, and it just has that nice hole for mixing that you just want to like shove another flavor into. pleasantly surprised by this one. I honestly wasn't expecting much reading a lot of the other reviews. It does taste pretty heavily artificial. It has a little bit of bitterness to it too, but it feels like kind of an authentic bitter artificial. It does a pretty good job of evoking the candy overall. So the last flavor I have, thematically not a fit with this set at all, but I wanted to go ahead and just blow through the rest of my Flavorwest stuff that I had in the queue. I do have their tangerine flavor, and since it's a citrus, I went ahead and dialed down my mixing percentage a little bit. Instead of testing it up at 8% for the Green Goblin or 6% for Beetle Juice or Jawbreaker, I went ahead and bumped it down to like 4%. I found that their citrus flavors are generally pretty top heavy and pretty aggressive. It's listed as a natural flavor, and I'm pretty sure it's like Ruby Red Grapefruit with Flavorwest, where they only have the one version. It's just the straight natural. They don't have the natural and artificial version, so they just end up calling it tangerine instead of like natural tangerine. Yeah, that tastes a lot like tangerine zest, like tangerine oil. It's top heavy, pretty heavy on the actual zest. But I feel like if you're gonna go heavy on one kind of citrus zest, tangerine's a pretty mellow, easygoing one to go for. It doesn't seem to have a lot of like a juicy base to it. You get a little bit of sweetness underneath that sort of heavier tangerine zest hop note, but it feels a little bit thin right in the middle. It feels a little bit watery. It's on the sweet side, but it's not like candy sweet. It isn't as sweet as like Capella's sweet tangerine. It feels like if you could get like a juicier citrus flavor, this would actually do a really good job of sort of adding back in those realistic zest top notes to it. But yeah, even up at 4%, which is probably on the high side for some of these flavors, there's not a lot to dislike here as long as you come into it expecting tangerine zest. It's fairly bright, pretty vibrant. It doesn't have any of the waxiness that I get with like Flavor Arts Mandarin, which is good. I would end up using this pretty much just for the top notes. If you already have like a juicier, sweeter base and you want it to pick up like a little bit of tangerine or mandarin top notes, this sounds like a pretty good option. But yeah, it reminds me quite a bit of the Ruby Red Grapefruit and their Blood Orange, where you get a good smattering of the top notes without like a ton of juicy base to it. Sort of another pleasant surprise. Actually, I was expecting this one to probably be the best out of the bunch, and it probably is. But for those other flavors, they seem to be doing well. I don't know what the fuck Beetlejuice is supposed to taste like. But for the Green Goblin, for the Jawbreaker, they're doing artificial in a really true to life way. So they're very much a good fit for the profile if your profile happens to be like rampantly artificial. But thank you for watching. I'll go ahead and try to crank out some more actual flavor comparison videos focusing on single flavors. But for right now, while I'm still sort of obligated to keep up with daily flavor reviews on Reddit, I figured I'd go ahead and film these and put these up too. So thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you later.